So here comes this email and it's a no-brainer price and you're dealing with the guilt that the person has for not being able to attend and they thought they were going to. I mean, pretty genius.
Want more people engaging with your event, finishing your course content, and especially following through on your CTAs? Boy, have I got a great episode for you today. Jordan talks with the co-founder of Hello Audio about how private podcasts can boost your business's reputation and bottom line. If you want to hear more from Dr. Lindsay about private podcasts and so many other experts with their own tips and strategies to elevate your podcast, be sure to click the link below to sign up for the Elevate Your Podcasting Summit.
So when it comes to virtual events like virtual summits, what is your goal when you participate in them, whether it's as a speaker, sponsor, host, even attending?
Oh gosh, I've done all of that. As somebody who's a speaker, it's connecting with the audience, offering value. My goal with that is usually like brand awareness. As the CEO of Hello Audio, spreading the word of private podcasting and how it can really help change businesses and change how we produce content and how our audience engages with us. And so just having a great experience of connection. And I've been in audio only summits, which has become a thing because of private podcasts. And then I've also been on ones that have had a feed that accompany video. And what I love about being a speaker at a summit that has the audio version is I'm more likely to listen to my colleagues who are also invited to the summit. And that is something that in the days before, private podcasting was a thing, I just never had time for. It was like, I'd run in, like do the summit and it's like, oh yeah, she's cool. Like, oh, that talk looks really good. And it was just like in all the flurry of it, I never got around to listening to it, which as a guest in a summit or somebody who opts into one, that's also very common. You have to select. So the reason why audio makes that easier is for all the things that I laid out prior. I don't have to log in anywhere. I don't have to sit in front of my computer. I don't have to be looking at a screen on a walk. I can just like listen to it. And so I found that I started consuming my colleagues' content more. And I think that's really powerful because a lot of times the people that get invited to these things are very busy, but they're also very smart and then, awesome. And so getting to get their content and learn from them is like a goal that I would want to do, but I don't often find the time. So that would be my big thing, I think, is connecting with others and learning from other people. And so audio definitely helps me do that. As a sponsor with Hello Audio, we're a software provider. And so Summit hosts can use us. And so for us, it would definitely be a demonstration of the product and be able to provide value for your people, as brought to you by Hello Audio. I mean, that's pretty powerful, right? We haven't gone super deep into it as far as it's not a big chunk of our budget and we're not looking for a bunch of that, but we see that, we see where that's going. And so, for us, a goal of a sponsored event would be that buzz generated around our software would obviously be leads and signups in whatever capacity we could do that, whether we constructed a cool offer for the people of the summit or, there's other ideas that I've had for in-person events where you could create a scavenger hunt podcast where people are walking around the conference center listening to the podcast, right? So I think there are some cool things. And then there's a booth, right? And they have to find us and maybe there's Easter eggs. So I think what's cool with private podcasting is that exclusivity feel. And so I think there's some experiences that could be created even in person that would allow for a private podcast to be kind of a cool part of an event. So even if we don't sponsor the whole event or anything like that, but have a booth, creating a private podcast experience, I think would be something I would want to do, where someone could basically subscribe to a feed and either listen when they got home and we dropped a new episode right when they got home. Something cool like that, I think could be really valuable. And then the light bulbs go off, right? When people use it in creative ways, then they're like, oh, I could do, X, Y, Z. So it is cool, even without necessarily straightforward sponsoring, just being involved in an event with a private podcast, I think would be beneficial too. We've had speakers use them on a stage publicly and obviously virtually as well. And there's a lead magnet that you can sign up for. So we have QR codes that people can use or sign up pages and stuff like that. So it's a great thing to kind of pitch during a talk as well as a lead magnet is a private podcast. Because the one thing that I think is cool with private podcasting as a lead magnet, we've had a lot of people use that as such when they're guests on other podcasts, right? So similar for summits, you're a guest at a summit and it's like someone's listening to you talk, right? They may or may not be watching you depending on the medium that it's delivered. And so that is a medium that clearly this person enjoys, like, right? So having that be the thing they opt in for instead of, a book or something like that, or a PDF or an entire course or something, or a mini course. It's a little audio series. It's really cool. It shows up in your podcast app. People are like, oh, okay, cool. That's easy. That feels good. And that feels along the lines of how I'm already learning from you. So I think there's power in that too.
In your answer to one singular question, you have hit on like all of my soapboxes, the things that I get passionate about, from connection, collaboration among speakers. That one is huge. Like our Elevate Your Network event, Elevate Your Network Live, that happened in December. That was the biggest thing that came out of it, was collaboration among speakers coming out of that. So I'm super passionate about making that happen. Choosing my speakers with that in mind, like, you guys need to connect, come to my event, that kind of a thing. I love that. The creativity of just thinking outside the box, thinking about merging the virtual and the in-person experiences so that we can make the virtual more human and the in-person more accessible. Because, we go to a conference, we get hyped up, we come home,
there's parts you missed, maybe even if it's like a multi-layered event too. Like, what if you had to watch videos and find where they're at? Like, nope, it's just sitting in your podcast player. And it's like, oh yeah, I wanted to go to that talk, but I went to this one instead. So yeah, 100%.
Yes. I love it. I love you've got my wheels turning with the whole concept of how to integrate the private podcast and Hello Audio and what Hello Audio is all about with an event. You totally got my wheels turning there. What has been your biggest struggle, biggest complaint? If you had a magic wand and could change something about virtual events specifically, what would it be?
Ooh, that's a good one. When I go live and I've like taken the time to set aside, in my day, and I'm like there present live, not watching a replay, not listening to a podcast feed. Like, I'm there present. It's hard. And I know this as a teacher. So I don't know if you know this as my background, but I was a college professor. So engaging folks in a lecture experience or when you're one way talking is very difficult. A lot of people don't think about what it's like to be the student listening and taking notes or engaging or whatever. And like, what I find can be distracting is like a chat going, and some people are super like they need to type in order to stay engaged, right? Which, let them do that, right? But I think that can overwhelm other people, right? Where they're like, do I watch the chat? Am I watching the person? And then a lot of times you see this, the person gets distracted by a chat, right? So I think that whole managing the chat and managing what it's like to be a person sitting and consuming, to me, is tied to just thinking about the structure of the event and making it engagement and not just talking at. In a lot of virtual events, there's a lot of talking at, and it's hard. It's super hard to not do that, like very hard. And so being conscious of that and thinking about that from a perspective of, just like consumption and engagement, because I think it's easy for us to then have multiple tabs open. I'm browsing Facebook or I'm reading my email, like we all do it. Someone with ADHD probably does it even more. That's me, but I know most of us do it. And so how do we accommodate that? That's what's happening. And like, what can we do to make it not feel like that? I don't necessarily have the answer, but I would say like that magic wand, if like people all solved that problem and like knew how to be good presenters and like knew how to structure that would be pretty amazing.
I am so excited for you to be a part of our virtual summit, Elevate Your Podcast, because like I said, connection is one of those things that I get super passionate about. And so I have worked with other people in their events. And then of course with myself for my own events. Engagement is so key. It's an event. It's not a YouTube marathon.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want my summit to feel like, well, I could have just Googled all of these people and watched a few of their videos and then moved on. I want it to be an experience. It's an event. When we come together in person for events, we come for the people, the connection, for actually being in the room and getting that hype and those emotions going with people in community. So that's something I'm super, super fired up about, and will definitely be a part of the Elevate Your Podcast Summit itself. Having those opportunities to interact. One of the things that I have done for other people is I will come in and be the chat moderator, so that
that's huge.
The host don't have to worry about it. I collect questions as they go by in that Zoom chat. If it's, just a Zoom with a chat feature and people are dropping questions and then they're getting lost in the feed and all of that. I'll grab those so that at the Q&A time, we know that the texts from Jordan will have all the questions necessary. I don't have to scroll back through the chat, that sort of a thing. Because I love the chat. I'm one of those people who loves to type to stay engaged. And so as that kind of person, I try to be helpful to other people. I'm dropping quotes and things that people might want to copy and paste. The 3 main points, the bullet points that the speaker's going through, I'll type those up and drop them in so that they don't just disappear when the slide disappears, that kind of stuff. So since I did that naturally, it's like, well, definitely going to do that for my own events, can do it for people that I work with as well. Because yes, that whole thing is that it can be so distracting, but it can also be helpful. So how can we actually marry those two and figure out how to create interaction and community without just adding another layer of ADD distraction?
What made me start to think about this more was Amy Porterfield in her recent launch. I think she did a breakdown of what she did differently this time because she's launched a million bajillion times. And she said she had for her live webinars, because she's known for them, she had ones you can sign up for if you're a cup of coffee, grab a nice blanket, you never touch your keyboard listener, and you could go in that room. And then if you're the keyboard person, go in the keyboard room, right? And she basically created these personalities. And I would love to be a fly on the wall in the chill room, because so the chat, nothing's happening. And I'm I bet they're talking about the people in the room that talks a lot. But I think that kind of is cool because, to be fair, organizing the chat and even giving permission to people hey, you don't have to pay attention to the chat, whatever you need to do to stay engaged is cool. Even giving them that permission, it's still there. And it's still oh, that's kind of funny. But are you giving them a space to engage? Is there a place for people that don't like to type as a way to network, right? And that's an interesting one, because that's kind of the only way you can network during a talk, right? So if it's not during a talk, clearly, are you creating space for, I don't know that they're necessarily introverted, because I don't know, that's not really what it is, but it's just hey, I don't need to feel like I need to type all the time. And so I think just thinking about those type of personalities. So yeah, that was the first time I thought about that. And I tend to be more of an observer, and I would consider myself an extrovert. So I'm more of an observer in the social media, in the chat. I just tend to do that and chime in only when I really have something to say. But that doesn't mean I'm not paying attention to what's happening. So is there space for those folks too? And I don't know what the answer is necessarily to that, but she's the first person that I saw do that. And I was like, that's kind of fascinating. What a cool idea. And let people self-select the room. I don't know if she had maybe a fireplace. I bet you could have made it pretty funny thinking about that as an experience. And so thinking about these virtual events as experiences that make you go oh, that was different. I think that's what we're all looking for. And that was one thing when I heard that, I was like, that's a cool idea.
Yes, we're all looking for different in the virtual event space, because we had the lockdowns and we all just went to Zoom and started streaming things and trying this whole virtual connection, virtual event thing out. And we've gotten kind of stuck in that rut, especially since I've seen some of the bigger events that just keep doing what's quote working. And so they're just perpetuating this. It's old technology at this point, an old strategy. And so we're looking for different, and experimentation is good. Creativity is great. But we also need different that's better.
So not just different to be different. Yeah,
exactly. So I love that it was that self-selection based and that user experience perspective. It wasn't just, oh, I can put a nice little frame around and make my webinar fancier and more memorable. Okay, yeah, you can make it more memorable, but memorable isn't always the best. I actually oftentimes ask on this podcast the question, what was the most memorable event that you've been a part of? And I'll ask you that one in a second. But it's funny, the mixture of answers that we get on this podcast, because sometimes they're memorable in the positive. I want to do an event like that again. It was awesome. It was incredible. That's generally the majority that we get. But I had a friend answer that question to me who's a magician. And the most memorable event that he's been a part of was one that he had less than 24 hours to prepare and travel to because his buddy got sick at the last minute and needed him to fill in. And so it was super memorable because it was the whole whirlwind of
Yeah.
he could make this happen. And so, yeah, it can be negative, it can be positive, memorable, different. We need memorable, different, and better.
Totally.
So what's the most memorable event that you've been a part of?
Do you want an in-person and a virtual, or is it
Sure,
even like
whatever
both?
comes to mind.
Yeah, I got to shout out Stu McLaren Tribe. It's now called Membership Experience, I believe. And gosh, I went in 2018. And so it was in Toronto. And it was memorable in that he took us to a Blue Jays game. The whole conference went to a baseball game. And you know, his whole vibe is like connection, experience, like it's now retitled membership experience. And from a conference perspective, getting surprised, getting to go to a baseball game and getting on a bus in order to do that. And they kept it a surprise. Like, that's pretty crazy. And his breakdown of it after too, he's like, you know, I was told by my friends, like, why would you spend that much money? Like this at this event, I don't know what his numbers were exactly, but the argument was like, well, this is crazy. Like you're spending probably several, like hundreds of thousands of dollars potentially on not just the event itself and all the things, but this like getting a bus and going and buying tickets and all that tied to it. And he's like, not only did it just like create this great experience for everyone who was there, but they were all posting about it. And then he had great B-roll for like all his content. Like it wasn't just like, oh, they bought a ticket and it came with a baseball thing. Like there was ROI in like ways you can't trace. And I think when you think about customer experience, that kind of impact, again, it might be hard to be like, this person bought this and, you know, whatever, like joined by this, like, because they went to a baseball game, that doesn't track. But the fact that I can talk about it, however many years later, 6 years later, as my most memorable event experience, like that was it. And then guess what? I went to the next one too. And we didn't go to a baseball game that time, but he like got us all on a ferry and he rented out this crazy bar that overlooked like the Toronto, I don't know what body of water is there, but there is one. And like it was beautiful. And we had this like party and it was great. And then I was like, that was really cool. And so I think treating people like that, like, hey, we're going to sit around and listen for a lot, you know, but then I'm also going to create these experiences. We did a scavenger hunt. Like we got outside and we did stuff. And I think that was cool. But yeah, the baseball game is still the thing that I was like, no way he's sending us to a baseball game. Like, no way. We had shirts. So we had a section. I mean, it was pretty genius. Like looking back, hands down the most memorable.
Wow, amazing. I would love to hear about your favorite use case of private podcasts associated with events.
That's a good one. I think I have to just go to like, it's my favorite because it solves such a big problem. It's literally offering a private podcast feed of the speakers. Like that sounds so not cool. And like, I know we're talking about innovative and stuff. And like, I maybe someone's done an in-person like scavenger hunt thing. I think it's a great idea, but we haven't like done it. But virtual summits got a really bad rap. Like they're cool and they can grow certain people's lists, right? Like really big. And then all of a sudden everyone starts doing it and you're like, wait, who's benefiting from this? Like I'm supposed to watch 50 videos in 2 days. Like what do you, clearly I'm not the important person as the guest signing up. Like the person who gets to be the important person is the host who now has like 50,000 email addresses. And so I think that rubs people the wrong way. It's like from a learning experience, from a like consumption perspective, it's like, this isn't working. Like why, like people aren't watching all the videos. So, and then I'm a guest and or a speaker and like the likelihood that my video gets watched is probably pretty low. So now I have to come up with like the best topic ever. So anyways, all that to be said, when private podcasting started to become a thing and we saw it, like part of the backstory, just as a quick side, Hello Audio was like created because of courses. Like I used to teach people how to build courses and I was like, I wish I could just listen to this. So that was like the first use case, courses. And once I sold it as such. I sold lifetime licenses. It was like, oh, it all of a sudden I was buying Podcast Your Summit, Podcast Your Book, Podcast Your, whatever, because I sold it as Podcast Your Course originally in 2019. So Podcast Your Summit, I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to solve such a huge problem. Like people could actually listen to all 50 episodes. Yes, you could charge $97 so they can keep them and listen over time, or not, or they get it as part of the ticket. Like either way, you're focusing on the person actually being able to listen to and use the content. And even if someone pays $97 for videos behind a membership site, again, how's that doing? Like, are they actually going back and watching it, or did you just collect $97 from them? And they didn't do anything with it, which never rubbed me the right way from a business perspective. You put all that time and effort in organizing these people. You want the audience person that paid you to get something out of it. So if they're not consuming the content, they're not winning there, And so, yeah, my favorite use case for summits is just selling replays, even if you don't sell them. We've had somebody early on to did a downsell. So I think she, I don't remember if the podcast feed was sold. Yeah, she probably had a $97 ticket, typical upgrade ticket. You get all these products with it, whatever, cool. That was 97. And then the summit ended and she's like, hey, if you didn't take me up on the 97, what about $27 just for the podcast recordings, right? And so she actually was able to create more revenue on the back end, because what is a thing that a summit attendee experiences after is man, the day's over, it ended and I didn't have $97 and it wasn't that intriguing. I've bought that before and I didn't watch anything, right? So we know in the brain of the customer. And so here comes this email and it's a no-brainer price, and you're dealing with the guilt that the person has for not being able to attend and they thought they were going to. I mean, pretty genius. So just playing with that, even though it's the most basic, the replays of the event, there's lots of cool ways that you could structure that. And so going a little further with strategy is a downsell post an event that really hits that part of hey, I know you probably got really busy and you had dreams of watching, all of them. Here's those recordings in podcast form for, a couple bucks. Pretty smart.
I love that concept. Now, naturally, our Elevate Your Podcast Summit is going to have an audio feed and all of this that we've been talking about. But now you've got me thinking maybe.
Yeah, look out for Jordan's downsell after.
Yeah. We'll see how it all comes together. So we've got to wrap up the conversation. We could talk all day, I am sure. But what is the number one thing that you want listeners to remember about our conversation, the whole conversation today?
I like the first line that I said, a public podcast, you don't know who's listening, right? So with private podcasts, you know who's listening. That's key. And then look at your business and just be what are some cool ways that I could increase the consumption for my people and add audio in those places? You don't have to reinvent a brand new thing. It can be something you already have, a book, your husband's book. It doesn't have to be brand new content. And that's such a great, perfect place to start when it comes to private podcasting. Yes, there's lots of ideas and there's crazy cool things you could do, but dipping your toe, start with content you already have.
I love it. I love it so much. And that's so much of what we talk about in the summit interview. And so speaking to the listeners now, if you have not signed up for the summit yet, make sure that you are signed up, because the bonus content that we recorded today with Lindsay about Hello Audio, about using a private podcast to elevate your current podcasting, it is gold. So make sure you are signed up. This has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for being here, Lindsay.
Thanks for having me, Jordan. Super fun.
You are so welcome.